Good morning. Welcome back to Fresh from Maryland, a series from Maryland Snap Ed all about the wonderful things coming from Maryland farms during the growing season. We cover how to buy them, how to prepare them, how to store them, how to make the most of them in your cooking. So I'm your host, Krista Carlson, and I do want to let you know this session is being recorded. So you're seeing the recorded version. We're usually live so we can interact with you on Facebook, but we did record this as we're working around the holiday and vacations, those things that happen in the summertime. So if you have comments and questions, please leave them in the comments below the video. We can still respond to them via Facebook. It just won't be in real time. So today we are joined again by Lynn Mateva, our project leader and nutrition educator for SNAP Ed in Wicomico County, Maryland. So welcome back, Lynn. Can you give us your, well, we usually do a market shout out, but you have a really exciting, different source of local produce in Wicomico County that you would like to share with us today. So let us know about that.
Yeah, so it's actually on the lower shore here. We have the ECI, Eastern Correctional Institute, and they have a tremendous garden down there, and they are growing just so much produce, and the boxes are being sent to places such as Adopt-A-Block, which is one of our community partners, but it also goes to places like the Judy Centers and other places in the area in Somerset County, and that's the county below us. But they are sharing that on the shore this summer, and so yeah, they've got tons of it every Saturday downtown Crisfield. There is at the Woodrow Wilson Community Center, which is the housing authority at 119 South 7th Street in Crisfield. Every single Saturday they're there with their food bundles, which include big boxes of produce and some meat bundles as well. And then Adopt-A-Block in Salisbury does their door-to-door community walkabouts, and they're on the second and fourth Saturdays of every month in the Church Street neighborhood area. And they say if you aren't in that neighborhood, it's okay. You can drive through there and look for a volunteer with a shirt, or you can show up at Emmanuel Wesleyan Church beforehand at 8:30 in the morning and get a package while they're loading up the trucks in the morning.
If you're in the lower eastern shore of Maryland and you could use some help putting fresh food on the table, please take advantage of those resources. We will share some links to information. It's really exciting to see community partners working together to not just get food to folks, but fresh, healthy, delicious food that's going to help their family not only be fed, but also be well and be healthy. So thanks for that, Lynn. What is our featured produce item of the day? And can you tell us a little bit?
Featured produce item of the day is raspberries and blackberries. I've got some of those as well because they're in the same family. So I thought it was something great to showcase because they are in season right now.
Great. So tell us a little bit about raspberries and blackberries. So they are in season. What are the different types that you can get? And how do you deal with these in your kitchen?
Sure. So they're grown in something called brambles, which are kind of like these thorny bushes that are in the rose family, actually. And the raspberries come, we have a red variety here today. They come in red, yellow, and black varieties. And you might be able to find them at your local store. They also, we have blackberries, and then there's something called a loganberry, which is a cross between a blackberry and a raspberry. So kind of neat that there's so many different varieties, and they are just so good for us. So a great food to incorporate into our healthy diet.
So how would you select the best berries when you're shopping for them at the farmer's market or grocery store?
Yeah, it's a great question. The farmer's market, they're going to be super duper fresh. They're probably going to have been picked that day, and you're going to be in, great luck when you stumble across those. In the grocery store, these are a very fragile fruit. So in the grocery store, you want to make sure that there's no mold forming inside the package. They don't have a very long shelf life from the time they're picked until the time we eat them. So just look at the package, look for, I don't want to say firm because they're a very delicate berry, but you don't want them to be bruised or crushed at all, kind of still like, they'll have like a big open center in the raspberries. The blackberries, they don't have an open center, but you want to make sure that they're not crushed or bruised at all. And just kind of peek in that container looking for like little white tufts of mold, make sure there aren't any there. And that's the best way to make sure you're getting the freshest berries.
Great. Yeah. And we've mentioned that in several of our Fresh from Maryland episodes, that if you're shopping at the farmer's market, you're so much less likely to see bruise, damage, or produce that's, kind of suffered from its trip across the country because you're getting it fresh. So we love that we can get produce throughout the year in the grocery store, but farmers markets are a great place to get them when they're at their most affordable and their freshest and have the longest shelf life, which really can impact whether your choice whether or not to buy something sometimes is like, well, I'm not going to get a chance to eat it before it goes bad. You're less likely to choose it. So, all right, great. So what are you going to be making with berries today?
We're going to be making a couple things. The first one is these raspberry oatmeal bars that we're going to make, and I'm going to throw some blackberries in there too, just to give them kind of a fun 4th of July kind of color. I should have said also though, when we were talking about the berries, I am using fresh today, but this could be done with frozen very easily. We're also making a salad. I probably wouldn't use the frozen in a salad, but for the raspberry bars, absolutely. And they may be way more affordable in the freezer section, especially in times of the year when they aren't in season. So yeah, the first thing we're going to do today is make our kind of topping and our base for these bars. So I have got an 8x8 pan here, and I've lined it with a little bit of parchment paper. You don't have to do this, and then I'm just going to give it a little extra nonstick spray and set that aside. And then we're going to combine our topping items. So we have a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. I've got a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. I'm using the dark brown, but light brown would have been fine. I just used what I had open and available here. I've got a cup of the quick cooking oats, and I'm going to throw, oh, they're going to go in next actually. And one thing I forgot, I left this butter in the refrigerator until just now so that it stays nice and firm, because I want to be able to kind of make a nice like flaky crust, and if it stays cold, then it's more likely to be kind of crumbly the way we want it to be. And then just adding, I'm going to start mixing all these together. You could use a pastry blender, a fork. I'm using a potato masher because it's something I think a lot of people have, and it really makes it so I can kind of blend all these things together and just push that butter so it starts breaking up into these kind of nice big chunks, but it blends in with the flour and the sugar. And then once
if you had instant oatmeal, we've talked about this on other episodes. If you had instant oatmeal, you could use that. You'd probably want to make sure you had the same equivalent, and you'd probably want to cut back on the sugar if it was flavored instant oatmeal, but that could be a fun shortcut.
Absolutely. And I'm just breaking up the butter a little bit more with my fingers. I washed my hands really well before we got started here today. Always important when doing any kind of food prep. And then I'm going to mix in this cup of oats. I'm just going to stir this all together. And then basically what I'm going to do is our recipe calls for me to divide this in half for the bottom and half for the crust. In testing this recipe, I thought it worked a little bit better if I used more like 1/3 for the topping. Of course, it's a preference thing. I also wanted to be able to see all those beautiful berries I had. So, but it seemed to work just fine with the amounts of liquid I'm about to add to this for my base. So, so the next thing we're going to add into this, and like I said, this is about 2/3, but you could do half. That's what the recipe calls for. I have got 2 tablespoons of applesauce. And a lot of people are, these are things that like they come in the school lunches or the summer meals. So you might have some of these little containers on hand. We're going to do 2 tablespoons of that.
We haven't talked about summer meals yet, but that is a great reminder that summer meals continue to be free for all in Maryland. And yeah, thanks for pointing that out with the applesauce and the orange juice. If you have leftovers that you want to feed to your kids in different ways, this is a great use for them.
So then I'm going to I've got about a tablespoon of orange juice here. We are also going to use some orange juice in the filling. So I'm not just using a tablespoon. We are going to use a little more, but yeah, if you've got those, and a lot of times the juices that come in those school lunches are about the same shape and size as those applesauce containers. So you'd have maybe just a little bit of a sip after making this recipe. And then once I get this all mixed together and it's kind of good and crumbly, just going to put this in this pan here. excess out of there. I'm actually going to mix the filling in the same bowl, and it's got some of the same ingredients, so it's okay, but I'm trying to get as much as possible for our base so they have a nice solid base for these bars. And then you could use your fingers. I'm going to use the bottom of my measuring cup here just to kind of press them in. This would be a great activity for a little kid to do.
Very clever. I wouldn't have thought of that.
A little bit sticky because of the apple juice, but just trying to spread it out and keep my fingers out of it as much as possible, especially where we're discussing food safety today. All right. And then the next thing we're going to do, set that aside for just a moment, we're going to make our filling. And I have a cup each here of raspberries and blackberries. And then we also have, we're going to use let's see, about a tablespoon of brown sugar. And we also have, we're going to put a tablespoon, 1.5 teaspoons, I'm sorry, of the orange juice. So a little bit more of that orange juice we're going to use. And then we have 1 tablespoon of flour that goes into this.
So that'll give the filling a little thickening to the juiciness, you know, so it'll be a little bit more less like liquidy juice, and it'll have a little bit of thickness to it as they cook down.
Absolutely. And so it kind of makes like it's like a you know, a little bit of a paste. And then we've got a cup each of these raspberries and blackberries, and I'm dumping them in. Now you could, again, use this and really mash this up and kind of make it like a very pulverized filling. I really wanted to showcase how pretty the berries are in the bars. So I'm just tossing it and making sure that this filling covers the paste we made of the flour and the orange juice and everything. It just coats everything nicely.
And that tiny bit of sugar that's in there will really kind of draw out some of the juice in the berries to give you that sort of balance between the solid berries and then having a little bit of delicious berry goo in between them, for lack of a better word.
And then what we're going to do is just take the rest of this topping and sprinkle that over these bars. And then our work here is done. We just have to place them in the oven for, it's a 375-degree oven, and it takes about 40 to 45 minutes for these to cook. So we're going to stick them in the oven and come check on them shortly.
Wonderful, great. And so we will check back with you to see the finished product, as well as one other recipe that kind of takes berries in a different direction. While we're waiting for that to cook, we're going to introduce our guest for today. Shauna Henley is a FCS educator, a family consumer sciences educator with University of Maryland Extension. So one of our colleagues, and she is kind of our permanent consultant for any questions around food safety. So Shauna's done a lot of research and a lot of education in the community about food safety. So welcome, Shauna. And can you just kind of give us a little overview, like why should we be thinking about food safety? We've got a lot of other things to worry about, but how is this relevant to our lives?
Thanks, Krissa. In terms of food safety, it's something you want to think about year round, but since we're looking at farmers market and that summertime months that lay ahead, we're thinking really about temperature, because here in Maryland, we know it's going to be above 90 degrees Fahrenheit a lot of the summer months. And so we also know too that a lot like germs and bacteria, they like a certain environment, just like people. For me, I like colder states, so Maryland gets a little warm for me. And just like bacteria, some bacteria love hot, muggy, warm weather. So things that bacteria and germs need is water, a happy temperature range. They need food. Some germs need oxygen, like us, to breathe. Some don't need any oxygen. And so you can start seeing that bacteria in a lot of ways are like us to survive. And so if we know germs need temperature, food, water, and oxygen for some to live, we can start thinking about what are we doing at home that could be giving them a better place to thrive. And we don't want them to thrive and multiply. So we do know that germs are everywhere. So what can we do to limit their growth? And so we'll talk about temperature and cooking as well as moisture a little bit later on. So if we're thinking about bacteria, what do you think would be the food group that's most likely to cause foodborne illness?
All right, so we're going to pull up some slides, including that question that Shauna just asked. So if you're watching, we're going to pause for a second so you can think through this. So dairy, vegetables, fruits, grains, and protein. What are the food groups that you think are cause the most food poisoning? Another word for foodborne illness. So this one surprised me. Give folks a second to think about it. So Shauna, what's the answer to this one? What food groups?
It actually throws a lot of people off because you would think it's going to be the raw meat or raw poultry or eggs or milk, but it's actually produce. So our fruits and vegetables that are more likely to get us sick. And if you think about it, how often have you cooked your lettuce greens before serving them to your guests or the rest of your household? Probably very little. So when we think about produce, such as our fruits and vegetables, you're most likely going to eat them when they're raw. And we have the saying that raw is risky, whether it's raw seafood, raw dairy products, or even raw produce. And there are things that we can do just to make sure that our produce is less likely to potentially get us sick. And I'll say here that our food supply is very safe, but just for some extra caution, because we know those temperatures, even if we have one bacteria, it can grow really fast under those right happy conditions.
Yeah, I think that's it's a good point. And again, it's like our food supply is very safe, I think, relative to points in history or to other countries. But I think right now thinking about this is important because I know in my household, just the idea of getting sick at all is very different than it used to be, even if it's not something I'm worried about, somebody having a really bad outcome. We're very hyper vigilant now. If somebody shows any kind of symptom, we're wondering, how does that throw everything in your life off? Does somebody have to get tested? So it's a good idea to just avoid as many of these potential pathogens as possible. And that's good advice for all times in life. But I think we're thinking about these things more in general. So let's talk a little bit about how that might be applied to shopping at the farmer's market. So fruits and vegetables are, more likely to cause foodborne illness just because you don't cook them. So what are some tips for farmers market shoppers that can help them avoid that wonderful fresh fruit and vegetable goodness getting them sick?
So good behaviors are going to be under cleaning. So washing your hands. If you have a sink and soap at the farmer's market, and paper towels to thoroughly dry your hands, because wet hands are more likely to touch and spread germs that we don't want. And especially now, you might be seeing more alcohol-based hand sanitizers at farmers markets. So that might not be a bad option, just to make sure that you're maintaining good hygiene for yourself as well as the farmers market vendors out of respect. Another thing too is that if you're buying eggs or meat or poultry or seafood, you may want to have a separate shopping bag. So you're keeping your fresh fruits and vegetables in one bag, and then what you buy meat, dairy wise, in another bag, so you don't potentially cross contaminate germs.
That's a great tip. I love that one. It's kind of what we would do at the grocery store, but sometimes there's a little bit more of a shuffle if you're, don't have a cart, or you're putting things in your backpack, or you've got little kids with you. So I think it's a good thing to think through in advance, is to have different bags for things.
And it doesn't hurt too to throw in any reusable bags that you bring either to the farmer's market or to the grocery store or wherever else you get your food from in the washing machine if possible.
Great. That's a great tip.
Another thing too, when I'm thinking about the farmer's market during the summer, I like to remember that I want to get those perishable foods like meat, eggs into the refrigerator as soon as possible when I get home. Just because we know the longer food sits out, the more likely that one germ can start growing its family and trying to make us sick. So thinking about when you're going to the farmer's market, is it the first thing you do? Are you going to be able to get home in time to put those perishable foods away? Or are you going to the farmer's market and then running errands for the rest of the day?
Well, let's go on to our next question. True or false? You do not have to wash organic produce. All right, so I'll let our viewers think about that for a minute. Think of organic produce. Does that make you think you have to wash it or not? All right. Give us the scoop, Shauna. Do you have to wash organic produce?
You want to wash your produce, whether it's organic or non-organic. Germs don't care where they live as long as they can grow. So whether you're buying organic blueberries at the farmer's market or non-organic blueberries, those germs are going to take advantage of the blueberries and still try to grow, if there were any germs on the blueberries.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think people think a lot, or maybe some people think, oh, I'm washing my produce to get off pesticide residues. And while there might be some value to doing that, really the point of washing is worrying about getting off any potential pathogens that could be on there. And so whether, maybe you think, oh, it's organic and it doesn't have these, synthetic pesticides on them, that's not really the main reason why we talk about washing our produce.
Right. And even so, washing, it might help remove some of the blueberry leaves or some of the stems that could still be on that piece of produce as well. And when we do talk about washing or rinsing produce, you want to make sure that you're rinsing or washing produce under fresh running tap water. You don't need to use any special produce cleaner. You don't need to use soap or bleach to wash produce, just because we would be concerned that you would be introducing a chemical into your food from either the soap or the bleach that you don't want yourself or your family members to accidentally eat, because that would cause a chemical hazard concern. And then again, when you're washing or rinsing your produce, you want to make sure you wash it right before you eat it raw or cook with those fresh berries, just because, especially when we're talking about raspberries and blueberries, any little extra moisture, when you put those berries that were washed into the refrigerator for a while, they're more likely to go bad a lot faster. And again, we know that germs need moisture, so we don't want to give them that moisture and hang out in the fridge to go bad faster or possibly allow germs to grow.
Great. All right, so let's go to our next one. We talked about this a little already, but true or false? It's 90 degrees outside, which I think it's going to be this weekend. I can shop at the farmer's market first and then run errands for an hour and a half before going home. So think about this. I think might be catching on if you're watching. Shauna, give us the scoop. Can you do this?
Ideally, if it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside or hotter, you want to get those perishable foods into your refrigerator as soon as possible. So ideally during our Maryland summer months, within an hour. If you were food shopping at the farmer's market during the fall or winter months or early spring, 2 hours is probably fine. And again, regardless of farmer's market shopping, or if you have a barbecue with your family members, you want to make sure that you have leftovers or you have food that's out during the barbecue for maybe an hour if the temperatures are 90 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, just because we don't want to allow germs that time to grow fast.
Yeah, so if you're getting ready for your 4th of July barbecue this weekend, keep your eye on the potato salad. So, so something that's moist and has, you know, lots of starchy, mayonnaise-y, food for bacteria. You want to make sure you keep that chilled or get it back in the fridge within an hour if it's going to be hot. Great. And then, yeah, and if you're shopping at the farmer's market and you know you are going to buy, particularly like you said, meat or dairy, these perishable foods, might be worth bringing with you with some ice.
Yep, anything to keep things cool longer is a good thing.
Yeah. Right, so what we're going to do now is look at the recipes that Lynn is going to be making. This recipe is for a snap pea and berry salad. So Lynn's going to be making this when we go back to her. Just kind of talk through what are the food safety steps that you would have to make and keep in mind within this recipe, which includes fresh snap peas, fresh berries, vinegar, olive oil, sugar, and then you can add some additional berries and salad greens at the end. So what are the food safety steps that you or sort of jump out at you when you look at this recipe?
So this is when you can put on your food safety detective hat, because some recipes will lay out certain food safety steps and others will not. So when Lynn was preparing her bars, she talked about washing her hands, which is great. Another thing that I loved about Lynn's preparation of the berry bars was that she also left a flat metal ring on, nothing with huge grooves on it, no bracelets, because when you're preparing food, and especially using your hands like she did, any sort of grooves and jewelry and bracelets are spots where germs could hide out until a later time. So the less things that you're wearing on your hands and wrists, the better for food prep. But when we're looking at this recipe, we see in directions 1 that you're going to be rinsing all your produce under water. That's great. Right before you cook or eat it raw. Another thing here too that this recipe doesn't mention, but it's implied, is washing your hands ahead of time. So those would be 2 tips that I would look for when preparing this recipe. Another thing I'll mention too is that the 2 cups of mixed salad greens, you might want to read if it came in a package that said it's been triple washed, or maybe you talk to the farmer's market vendor and they tell you that their mixed salad greens has been triple washed or it's ready to eat. So that just means you don't need to rinse those greens ahead of time just because they've done it for you. And even from a food enjoyment perspective, your dressing is going to stick to the salad greens that are dry a lot better than if they were pre-washed.
Yeah, so if you don't own a salad spinner and you've wondered why somebody would buy a gadget to do that, that's exactly it. Is it dries it off both for a storage safety perspective, but also like Shauna said, just because it's they're nicer to eat when they're not kind of soggy and then the dressing sticks to the dry ones. I think that's something else. There was a vendor I used to buy salad greens from at the farmer's market, and the salad greens were triple washed, but they were never well dried. And so I always found that they didn't keep well when I got them home. So I either had to kind of spread them out on clean towels on my counter to let them dry, or choose to buy my salad greens elsewhere. So great. Well, let's look here at the next recipe, which is the one that Lynn just got finished preparing, which is the raspberry oatmeal bars. So this one, there's a few elements in this one that I think might be surprising to folks from a food safety perspective. So what do you see with your food safety detective hat on when you look at this one?
So we'll hone in on flour. So if we can jump to the next slide, people might not have heard about raw flour being a certain risk. So in the past few years, we've seen a couple of outbreaks related to handling raw flour. So the main message here is that if you're using flour like Lynn did in the bars, or if you're making cakes, cookies, or anything else that involves flour, you really don't want to be taste testing the raw dough, just because there's a concern that there could be germs in it that you don't want to eat or have young children taste test. Just because the way the flour is milled, it doesn't go through that heat step. So Lynn's going to be baking the bars. That heat would kill any sort of germs that could potentially be in the flour. The next time you're at the grocery store, check the bag of flour that you're buying and see if it says any safe food handling steps on it, like wash your hands or don't consume raw. And that's the last tip I'll have for that recipe.
Great. And I think this one we've all, I think, grown up, or at least some of us being told, oh, don't eat dough with raw eggs in it, thinking raw eggs. And certainly that is a concern. I think, you know, that is on a lot of people's radar, whether they stick to it or not, but with eating raw cookie dough. But I think this is like fairly new information that the food safety concern around flour is there. So whether there's raw eggs in there or not, that it's still not a good idea to eat raw dough or batters.
Right. So these are some of the newer trends that we're seeing with food and germs popping up where we don't expect it. Again, our food supply is very safe, but if we know this information, we want to share it with you so you can make informed decisions about how you're handling food at home.
Great. Well, we have two resources that we're going to show before we head back to look at Lynn, what she's got going on in her kitchen. So can you tell us a little bit about these two sites and how they're set up to help consumers?
Sure. So the two websites are eatertoss.com and then foodsafety.gov. So eatertoss is actually developed by someone in Northern Virginia who's worked with food scientists to make sure that they're giving good advice. But basically, as you can see from the pictures, sometimes you might grow your own food, or maybe something starts to go bad a little quickly and you're not sure if you should toss it or can I still eat it? And sometimes it's just a growth defect. Other times it might be something you would actually want to throw out. But you can actually search some of your questions about the produce you have, or you can even submit a photo to Eat or Toss and they can help work with you to identify whether you want to throw this apple out or use it elsewhere. And this should be a tool that can help reduce food waste and throwing money out your door. Similarly, foodsafety.gov has an app called Food Keeper. It's free to download, and it also helps navigate some of those decisions about how long you can keep certain food items in your refrigerator or your pantry. So they're just useful tools if you don't have time to email me or check out another extension resource near you.
Thanks for that. I know that Shauna, I texted her, I guess it was maybe 2 years ago now, when our refrigerator went up in hot July weather. And, you know, I knew most of the stuff we had to toss, but I had questions about, you know, condiments and things like that. And so she pointed me to the Food Keeper app, and that was really helpful in making those decisions. There were very few things I was able to save. It was very sad. And I also love the point about the eat or toss, that we want to balance, you know, being food safe, but not be, you know, creating excessive waste, because that waste not only is waste food, but it's waste money and time. So very cool. Well, thank you, Shauna. And I hope folks will keep this in mind as they're headed to the market or as they're preparing for 4th of July or other summer celebrations, because as you point out, this warm weather does sort of make the risk of some foodborne illnesses a little higher, because it's harder to keep things cold. So thanks, Shauna.
Thanks for having me.
Great. All right, well, let's go back to Lynn and check in on our berry bars and the berry and snap pea salad.
All right, so I'm going to do the salad now and show you that I thought it was really cool. You're talking about a salad spinner, and I had washed my lettuce. I grew it outside here, and I washed it in a salad spinner, and then I'm just going to do this a few times to get all the leftover water out of it. Some of them have like a crank that's not quite as difficult as having to do the pull cord, but it's another activity kids usually really love to do. So it's a great way to get them in on washing the produce.
I can vouch for that. My kids fight over who gets to spin the salad. So it is while it is another thing to have in your kitchen, it does have value beyond just trying your salad greens.
That's great. And so then we are going to, now these peas, the original recipe calls for cooking these. I'm going to use them raw today. I just really like raw berries. I mean, raw snap peas, but you could blanch these in water for about 1 to 2 minutes in hot water or boiling water, and then cool them under running cold water briefly to toss in this salad. So we're going to use these as they are. And then we're going to mix together. I've got 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. You could use raspberry vinegar or any sort of wine vinegar, red wine vinegar, things like that. I just chose balsamic because that's what I had. And then I've got 2 tablespoons of olive oil. An optional ingredient is a pinch of sugar, about 1/8 of a teaspoon, just a little tiny bit, but it really brings out the flavor of the raspberries with the balsamic vinegar, which is a really neat ingredient to have with the raspberries. And then I've got a little pinch of salt, pepper to taste. And then I'm going to be taking these and I'm going to toss them all together. Now, again, our recipe has where you can strain it. So what I'm going to do and kind of put some of the pulp in there, I'm just going to take a little bit of them because I like the big berries, but I'm going to kind of mash them up together in here so that we do have some of that raspberry juice in for flavor. And you could strain them out. I like them. I'm leaving them in there. And then I'm going to toss the rest of the berries in. And I'm going to toss in my sugar snap peas. And
All
then
which have been meticulously washed.
I've been, absolutely. And they did say they were triple washed on the packet. I still washed them. Actually, not only were they washed, but a lot of them had these little pieces on the end that kind of needed to be cleaned off of them. So I see a couple that I missed, but I peeled these little pieces of the vine off of them as I was washing them and getting them ready. And then just about a couple cups of salad greens here. And all I'm doing is I'm going to toss this all together. My bowl is not large enough. Underestimated bowl size here. Going to dump it into this other bowl, which will hopefully get everything off the bottom that I couldn't show you. And we have this lovely salad,
That is beautiful.
which makes us feel a little better about eating our raspberry bars, our sometimes food we're having here. And so I
that salad up so we could get a good visual on
sure.
that is just lovely. The colors are just fantastic.
It smells really great too. It just smells so fresh. And I think the balsamic vinegar really does something to brighten up those raspberries. You could also use blueberries or blackberries, but since raspberries were one of our focuses today, I just chose those, and just so bright and pretty. And then I now have here our blackberry oatmeal bars out of the oven. And because I put them on this parchment, I'm going to lift the whole thing out so you can really see them. And then all we have to do is cut them into squares.
Oh, those look so good.
And they smell so good too.
Lynn, I'll just have to mention, I love the cutting board, how it isn't too grooved or used, because sometimes with wood cutting boards, they get very well loved. And after a while, they need to be thrown out. So thank you for sharing.
And a lot of times I do, especially if I'm using foods like our vegetables or meats, things like that, I do try to use a plastic cutting board because I feel like they get a little bit less of the grooves and have the less absorption of the bad bacteria. At least
And you can throw it in the dishwasher and if you have that sanitizer setting. Great, thanks for that.
All right, well, those look delicious. So while we're getting sort of our final presentation plated, we're going to show our upcoming sessions. So we're here every Thursday throughout the summer at 11 a.m. Next week, we are back live on July 8th with a corn feature. Now, is there anything that's more iconic in the summer than fresh corn on the cob? So we typically start seeing corn at the farmers markets right around the 4th of July, maybe a little bit earlier, a little later, depending where you are in the state. We're going to be talking about corn. I'm super excited for that. I can't wait to eat my first corn on the cob. We're going to be talking about blueberries on the 15th. Peaches, I think, right up there with one of my favorite fruits, maybe my favorite of all time fruit on the 22nd, and eggplant on the 29th. So that's a great one too, because that's one of the things very abundant at the markets, and some people just run out of ideas what to do with it. If you are watching this on our Facebook page, you know how to find us there, but make sure you like our page and you turn on notifications so that you get reminders to join the live broadcast. The other places you can find us on the web, we have our Eat Smart website, which is where all of the recipes that we feature on our Facebook Live series are located. It's a new website. So all the same recipes and more that used to be on our old website, but that's a new address. It's beautiful. We've got pictures of many of the recipes, and some we have step-by-step videos as well. Facebook page is there for our live series, as well as daily information and tips on healthy living, keeping your kids active, drinking more water, resources that are out there on the internet to support your healthy eating and healthy living goals. And then finally, our YouTube channel. So we archive all of the Freshman Maryland series there. We have other live series that are there. And we also have a lot of nutrition education lessons, as well as recipe videos that you can watch there as well. So please make sure you follow all of our feeds so that you don't miss any great information. And we're going to go back to Lynn now to get a look at the final presentation of these delicious berry dishes. So let's see that.
We have this delicious salad, and as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking to myself, I'd really like to throw some walnuts in there. I think that would really make it really just delicious and give it, some protein. And then we have, ta-da, our berry bar.
Beautiful. That would be great for breakfast or for dessert. A little scoop of yogurt on that would be delicious. So, wow, thank you so much. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you, Lynn, for your kitchen skills. As always, thank you, Shauna, for your expertise on food safety and helping us make sure we're keeping that in mind as we move into the hot summer months. And we hope to see you back here live next week at 11 on Thursdays. Bye-bye.